You know that feeling, right? That sense of being constantly overwhelmed, like you're running a race with absolutely no finish line in sight. Well, what if I told you that feeling isn't just in your head? It's a signal. And in this explainer, we're going to trace that signal from our own minds all the way to a pretty surprising place, the world of artificial intelligence. So let's follow this signal and see where it leads.
So let me ask you this, and be honest. Have you ever finally gotten a moment to just stop, to do absolutely nothing, and then, boom, you're hit with this wave of guilt? If you've ever felt that, then you are right at the very heart of the problem we are unpacking today.
So where does this all come from? Well, we're living in what you could call the age of overload. It's this time defined by a constant, low-humming pressure to do more, be more, achieve more, and it's leaving so many of us feeling like we're just permanently running on fumes.
Social psychologist Jonathan Haidt, he really puts his finger on a huge piece of this puzzle. He argues that we've basically rewired childhood, and the key thing to get here is that this wasn't some slow, gradual evolution. Nope. This was a dramatic shift, and it's had some pretty dramatic consequences.
And believe me, those consequences are measurable. This number right here, 145%, that is the increase in major depression among teenage girls since 2010. And for boys, it's even higher, a jaw-dropping 161%. This isn't just a feeling, it's a public health crisis, and these are the staggering numbers.
And you can see the really stark contrast Haidt is talking about right here. I mean, look at this. On one side, you've got a childhood built on outdoor play, real social interaction, independence. And on the other, a world that's mediated almost entirely by screens and constant digital connection. This isn't just about how kids have fun. These are two fundamentally different ways of building a human brain.
And that rewiring of childhood, it bleeds directly into our adult lives. As therapist Emily Satiriadis points out, that guilt we talked about, it comes from this powerful, unspoken rule in our society. Your value is tied to your productivity. You are what you produce.
And what does that create? A totally vicious cycle. We push ourselves to the absolute brink because we think we have to, and that leads to burnout. But then, and here's the irony, that burnout makes us less productive, which just feeds the very anxiety we were trying to outrun in the first place. But what if this feeling isn't just about our modern world? What if the roots go way, way deeper? To really get a handle on our modern anxiety, we have to look at our ancient biology. It turns out our bodies are kind of running on an operating system that was designed for a very, very different world. So this is what's called the defense cascade. It's our evolutionary, hardwired response to danger. First, a threat is detected, and we become alert. That's arousal. Then, if we can, we go into active defense, fight or flight. But what happens when we can't fight and we can't flee? Well, that brings us to the final involuntary step, freeze. And it's not a choice, it's an automatic shutdown.
Now, when the threats are constant, the endless emails, the social media pressure, the 24/7 news cycle, that first arousal stage can get stuck in the on position. That's hypervigilance. It was a great trait to have for keeping us safe from predators in the wild, but in our modern world, it just keeps us completely exhausted.
And when that hypervigilance gets to be too much, when the threat just feels totally inescapable, the body can pull this emergency brake, tonic immobility. That's the biological term for the freeze response. It is the body's last resort when fight or flight have already failed. We're talking about a state of paralysis, a total system override.
This quote, wow, it makes that abstract idea terrifyingly real, doesn't it? It's not just feeling stuck. It's a deep physical experience, paralysis, numbness, a weightiness. This is what happens when our ancient survival wiring gets totally overloaded by modern stress. And this constant state of red alert doesn't just exhaust us, it physically changes us.
So now, let's actually look at the hardware itself. Because this chronic stress, this feeling of being overwhelmed, it isn't just a psychological thing. It leaves a very real physical footprint on the brain.
And this isn't theory. Thanks to technologies like MRI, we can literally see the physical damage. We now know that chronic exposure to trauma and stress causes measurable physical changes to the volume and function of critical parts of our brains.
And the damage is so specific, it's devastating. The brain's fear center, the amygdala, it actually shrinks, but it becomes overactive. It's like a faulty alarm system that's constantly screaming danger. The memory hub, the hippocampus, it shrinks too, making it harder to form new memories. And maybe most importantly, the communication bridge that connects the two halves of our brain starts to break down.
The best way to think about the corpus callosum is like a heavily insulated electrical cable. It's covered in this stuff called myelin, and that insulation makes sure signals travel smoothly between the two sides of your brain. Well, chronic stress starts to wear away at that insulation, kind of like a frayed phone charger. And you start to get communication shorts, misfires between the logical and emotional sides of your brain. That is the neurobiology of feeling overwhelmed. So we've got societal pressure and our ancient wiring creating this perfect storm inside our brains. But this is where the story takes a really fascinating turn. It turns out this pattern of overload and breakdown, it isn't just a human problem anymore. It's now showing up in our most advanced artificial intelligence. I know that might sound like a weird question, but stick with me because the answer is incredibly revealing. By studying how and why these incredibly powerful AIs fail, researchers are actually uncovering fundamental truths about the limits of any information processing system, and that includes the one inside our own heads. So, in this really interesting twist, scientists are now using a theory from human education. It's called cognitive load theory to figure out why massive AI models are breaking. They're basically treating the AI like a student in a classroom who's going to burn out if you give them way too much homework. Okay, so the theory breaks down mental effort into 3 buckets. First, you have intrinsic load. That's just how hard the task itself is. Then you have extraneous load. That's all the distracting noise, like a confusing user interface. And finally, germane load. That's the good stuff, the deep thinking you need to do to actually understand something. Now, if the total of those 3 goes over the system's capacity, it fails. Simple as that.
And this is exactly what they tested with something called the CogniLoad benchmark. They created these logic puzzles for AIs where they could dial up the difficulty, the distractions, and the length of the task all independently. And you know what they found? The #1 cause of failure was task length. Just like us, even the most powerful AIs break down when they're forced to focus on a complex problem for too long. They get overloaded.
So, what does all this mean? Our biology, our society, even what we're learning from AI research. What's the takeaway? It tells us that being overwhelmed is not a personal failure. It is a system reaching its absolute physical limit.
And this gives us a really powerful way to rethink that guilt we started with. Rest isn't the opposite of being productive. It is a vital part of being productive. I love the phone battery analogy. It's perfect. You wouldn't get mad at your phone for not working on an empty battery, right? We are complex biological systems, and we absolutely require recharging. Rest isn't lazy. It's essential maintenance.
And so that's where we're left. We've seen that this feeling of overload is a real signal, one that's etched into our biology and is now being mirrored in our own technology. Our brains are running on software that was developed hundreds of thousands of years ago, but we're living in a world of constant, overwhelming digital input. The overload signal is loud and clear. So the real question is, how on earth do we close that gap?